Welcome everyone for another interview session. Today I'm really delighted to have someone with us that I used to work with a long, long time ago, a land far, far away. So I'm going to slide on over and waste no time with that. Let me introduce Alan Dayley. Alan used to work with me at a company called Big Visible that now is part of Accenture. And Alan was a delight in terms of a refreshing view and a take on things appreciated by the Agile coaches. Alan's got a ton of experience, and we recently started up a conversation, about what's been going on lately. He was a part of our Certified Agile Leadership course, and it was wonderful watching his conversations with others, and also at our alumni sessions where I hear him, sharing insights and takeaways that people are finding practically, real applicability for what they're doing. So I thought it'd be great to have a session where we kind of dive deep a little bit more into what's on Alan's mind and kind of bring that to light. So I'm going to bring Alan in. There we go. And he's on. Awesome.
Great. It's good to be here.
Yeah, welcome, Alan. So for those who don't know you, can you give us a little bit about your background, what you've been up to recently, etc.?
Sure. So I spent most of my career as a software engineer and tech lead and on the technical side of things. And when I finally looked into Agile, I was like, this is great. We need this. And I talked my way into kind of being the de facto Agile coach of 5 teams where I was working. Um, that company got bought out and they said, hey, we don't do Agile here. And I said, well, then I need to move on. And I moved on and went into Agile coaching. And that's where we met at Big Visible, right? When I got hired by Big Visible, it was great. And then that's been, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, I'd have to do the math, 12-ish years ago. Uh, and since then, I've been, an Agile coach consultant through 3 companies, through mergers and so on. And then I spent some time as a employee coach in a couple of companies. And so it's been a great experience and learned a lot. And I love sharing that information with people. Uh, Recently, I just came off of a layoff from a large bank, but I'm out exploring possibilities and continuing to try to learn and be able to define my thoughts in a way that people can understand them. Then
Wonderful.
we can talk about whether they agree with them.
Well, this is a perfect opportunity for that, Alan. And I think what I've already
Yeah.
seen in the class and what I've seen in the alumni calls is lots of not just a breadth and depth of understanding, but practical applicability for what people do now. And I think from the Agile leadership point of view, when we look at what's in the Cal class and the conversation we're having, that management layer, the project management, program management, or what I've been seeing more as service delivery management, Agile program management, is an aspect of this work we got to do that they're under pressure to deliver. There's still dates, there's still budgets, there's targets we need to hit, and yet supposedly we're going agile, and that's somehow overlaid. And you had a great insight that when we talked about it, you put some thoughts together that you're going to share today. You're kind of referring to
Yeah.
it as the wedge, and maybe you can kind of walk through your thoughts on that and give some insights.
Yeah. So as I'm over the years and even now currently, if you go and look at a work job description for, say, the director of an Agile PMO or a manager, right? A director, manager, senior manager, the word drive, you will find the word drive in there a lot. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And I realized that what we sometimes ask people to do is to drive a wedge into their already full circle. So I made this little diagram here, and it should be in here. Let me zoom in a little bit.
There you go. Nice.
It's too far.
I see it all
Okay,
now.
so yeah, so there's a reflection on there because of my lighting, but that says the work,
Mm,
right? So if you have a department, let's say you're the director of a department, maybe the engineering department, right? Director of engineering, you have whatever 15 teams working for you, and they have a lot of things they're supposed to be doing. And so if you look at the work capacity, the amount of work that they can do, you have to split that up between lots of things. One, of course, is the work. The work being the reason you're there is to write this app or create this system or whatever it is.
right.
And so that's the work. But you also have other needs that have to happen. like I'm calling this one up here, I'm calling it legacy updates. Like maybe you have some code that doesn't have automated tests around it, or it's very old and you need to update it to a new system or whatever. You're going to have to spend some time doing that. That takes away from the work, the new features you're supposed to be building. And then there's other places that want to take a slice of that time and that capacity, security compliance, HR kind of things of mandatory trainings and performance reviews and those kinds of things. Um, you're going to have to spend some time with SDLC compliance in larger companies. There was a company I was recently in where they literally were hiring one analyst per 3 teams to just simply fill out the SDLC paperwork.
Wow.
So that's how they found, we want to get more work done. Let's have somebody do this slice separately, right? But it's not completely separate, of course, because they have to interact. And then prod support. And so then you have this idea of, well, somebody somewhere says we're going to make a change. And of course, in our context, we'll say it's an agile transformation, but it could be any change, any significant change. And somebody says, hey, go drive this wedge into that capacity.
Mm-hmm.
You're the director of the Agile PMO. You have to go make that happen. Mm-hmm. And here I am, director of a department, director of engineering, and here's yet another group outside of me asking me to take time from the work to do something. Yeah. Right? And so over and over again in my experience, what I've seen is you get these situations where, wow, it's way too big. You get these situations where someone is asked to drive a wedge and it is rightly seen by the recipient as something that's going to disrupt their world in a negative way. Mm-hmm. And so both the person driving the wedge, like I don't have the authority to make the director of engineering change, but yet I'm judged or measured by whether or not I make them change. Mm-hmm. And the director of engineering is getting judged by delivering. He needs to deliver the stuff and have a stable system and all that stuff. And here's another wedge that's getting driven into that capacity.
Yeah, and I thought that was people. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying. It was kind of an analogy, or it's not really an analogy, but a way to visualize this negative impact that could happen both for the person with the wedge and the person getting driven. Right?
Yes, and that's actually what I was going to add on to, because I'm looking down like, look, work's already challenging enough. Certainly in IT, like no one has a shortage of work. I like the joke, like no one has a shortage of work, and yet, here we're going to say, like, can you please squeeze this in as well? So so that's one issue, and the second I think overlaid with that is this idea of like, look, I've got to juggle things. One of those things keeps the lights on, like tactical. Can I put these fires out today on my plate as a manager, a project manager, program manager? Mm-hmm. The other is strategic. That's nice. Someday we're going to be agile, and that might take years, etc. Which one's going to take priority of my time today? Well, yeah, the urgency of the day. So one, I think that challenge of workload's real. Two, you're asking me to do something I'm getting judged on the agile aspect, and yet if I had to choose between, important but not urgent and an important and urgent, it's always going to be the important and urgent stuff. So anyways, you were mentioning that you had like a list of ideas, things that might be worth looking into, a list that you put together. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so I've got it on paper here.
Perfect. Analog.
So the first thing is those people in authority, right? And so let's say upper management, right? If they're whoever it is that's saying we're going to make this change, mm-hmm. that person needs to use their authority and use their planning and whatever else you want to do to make space for that wedge. They need to make it safe to spend time, to spend energy, to spend focus on change. Change doesn't come for free.
True.
I can't remember who it was. Somebody said that one of the litmus tests for any significant change in an organization as to whether or not it will work is whether or not key people and leaders have space in their calendar.
Actually,
if nobody has space if they don't have space in their calendar, when you come along and say, hey, make this change and spend time on it, you're in an uphill battle. And so you've got to, as a leader, create that space. You have to make it safe and over again, tell people, make space for this, spend time on this. How much time do you think you can give for this? and have that conversation. Because over and over again, when somebody gets turned, when somebody says drive this into the organization, that space isn't there. And if the person who asked for it doesn't keep asking, is it happening? How's it going? Did you make time? Then people don't feel like they have permission to spend time on this new thing,
It's
right?
clear that's not the
So
priority
you
of
have to,
that, right?
yeah, you have to create that.
If I'm a leader and I'm not
Um,
asking about it, it doesn't sound like it's a priority. It's
right. And it needs to be a clarity, a priority, and it needs to be consistent clarity, right? Oh, I know you're going to spend time on this agile thing. How's it going? Right? Or whatever else the change is.
great.
Um, there needs to be a discussion too around uh, the safety of people's jobs in the change. In other words, for example, we say agile teams are self-managed or self-organized. I can count on my hand the number of times a manager pulled me aside. Right, the very first time it happened early in my coaching career, this guy says, "Hey, Alan, come in here," and I was like 3 days at the company, just introducing agile stuff. He says, "Come on in here, close the door." I'm like, "Oh, what's going on here?" I close the door, and he says, "I look at the picture of Scrum, and I'm not in it. A manager is not listed there. What do I do when the teams are self-managed?" Um, and so when you're asking for a change in the organization, those people who have significant, it makes a significant difference in their role, they're going to be a fear. There's going to be some fear there, latent, maybe not expressed, that their role is going to go away or change so much that they won't like it. And so you need to have that open conversation about here's what the change means to you.
Mm,
And by the way, we're not planning to send you away because here's other things that we want you to do or to do differently. Right.
very good point.
Um, and then the main thing that I think needs to happen is there needs to be a collaboration between the person leading driving the wedge. We'll keep using that term, and the people receiving the wedge, where you create some goals, some joint goals or joint OKRs or whatever your system it is that you use at your work, so that you say we want to create this outcome, and the agile coach bringing in agile change will contribute these things, and the department and the leaders of that department receiving that will do these things such that that outcome can happen. And the outcome is not just 5 teams have been trained, right? It needs to be actual business outcomes that takes or requires both the new thing and the current leaders to work together so that over the weeks and months they can track and reflect on how are we doing, is this outcome, are we getting closer, have we achieved it, what's the next outcome, how are we going to use these new tools, agile or whatever the train change is, how do we use those to achieve these outcomes together.
Right.
That way the leader, the manager, nor the coach or the person bringing the change are left holding the bag if something fails. They
Yes.
are together working on it together.
I like that. Well, one, agile as a means to an end instead of agile for its own name's
Mhm.
sake, which doesn't really generate a lot of support and stretch, etc. Like, can we, if this is just a bunch of hand waving and relabeling stuff, can we just say we're there already? Because I'm on a Scrum team. I think we're done. If there's true goals that Agile's supposed to help us benefit, now we're all moving towards something. I like what you're saying because those goals are really what create alignment, clarity, unity. It's one thing I like about Scrum that's so powerful is like, here's what we're trying to get done these next 2 weeks. This is the sprint goal. And it really changes from a collection of individuals and to a team. And yet, lots of times at senior leadership levels, director levels, they're not really working as teams or their peers across the group to get something done. They're working in isolation. They have their own goals and
Mhm.
objectives, and they're not in alignment. So taking what you're sharing, I 100% agree. Like let's use it and move it towards that for everyone's sake, but also for alignment, um, driving towards results. And I know
Yeah.
we talk about, and some of this came up in the Cal class about either cultural change that you can actually measure and see a difference, or the path to agility, or the business outcomes. Because you just mentioned something that I hear all the time, like, yeah, we're agile, we're on a Scrum team, like versus like, well, how do you know? I mean, how are we doing with the agile transformation and towards
Right.
what end? It really strikes, a point with me that really resonates. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I imagine at times when you've looked at these organizations, because you've been in a number of them, external and internal, etc. You've probably seen
Yeah.
patterns. Maybe you could tell a couple of quick stories of when did you see aspects of that working well, and or when did you see aspects of it not working well? There were missed opportunities in that transformation change effort in driving the wedge, as you were describing it.
Yeah. So I'll start with a positive story. Um, one of the amazing transformations, successful transformations that I was part of was in a company where early in like in our negotiations of why do you need a coach? Alan's going to be your coach. Let's see what Alan has to say. But I early on asked him, I says, why am I here? What do you want my efforts to accomplish? And they said, well, teach us agile. I said, well, no, why do you want the agile, right? What's the business reason? We came up with two, I'll call them key results, right? Because they weren't really objectives. There's more objectives as to why these key results are needed. But the key results that we kept harkening back to was one, they were selling an off-the-shelf software at the time that they were doing annual releases.
Ooh,
Once a year, they would ship a new version. And
wow.
they said, we want to get to quarterly releases, right?
Mhm.
It's not a huge, they weren't talking continuous release yet, but they're like, we want to get from annual to quarterly. Okay, great. And then the congruent goal was when we do annual releases, we end up spending 3 to 6 weeks doing hardening.
Wow.
And in
Yes.
their case, hardening means we're not making any new features. We're just simply trying to make all the stuff we built for almost a whole year actually work together,
Ouch.
right? So they wanted to go from long periods of hardening to 2 weeks or less of hardening.
Good.
And so for the time that I was with them, we were always looking at those two key results. How is it that this Scrum team or that Scrum team or this way of planning or joint big room planning that we were doing or all the things that we were trying to do and make better,
Mhm.
we're like, are we achieving this ability to release every quarter? What's next to go there?
Mhm.
And so the leaders, like the director of engineering and his upper management stuff, they were looking at things like, well, can we do integration? How can we automate integration? Right? Things that I had nothing to do with directly. They were looking at changes that needed to be made to reach those two goals. At the same time, I was like, well, our teams are out of balance. We don't have cross functionality. Let's get a few of those experts on that one team and put them in these other two teams so that those teams have full cost functionality, right? So my perspective was also contributing to those goals to get to that point where they could ship new stuff every quarter, and we got there in 7 months.
Wow. That's great.
um, so it was really exciting. um, there was another organization that I was in where it kind of worked. We did some great stuff. Okay, so for example, the second week I was there was their third program increment planning, right?
Okay.
Which is a safe term, but it means a 3 month. They were making their third quarterly plan since
Mhm.
they've been trying to do scale that as a framework. It was the worst planning event I have ever seen, literally. Um, and we said, okay, so what can we make better here? What do we need to do different? And I worked with an internal coach, and the two of us were pairing off and we were planning together and we were doing things and trying to influence things. We got to the point that the next PI planning, everybody loved it. And then the PI planning after that, we had visitors from all over the company come to see what that PI planning was like,
Wow.
right?
That's turned down
So
some.
we did some good things. But one thing we did not accomplish there is we had significant difficulty getting a senior manager to talk to other senior managers or senior managers in general to work together. We literally had the product VP of product for that group and the VP of engineering explicitly refused to talk to each other, even though they had competing goals. Right? The VP of
Wow.
engineering wanted more automation and all kinds of stuff, and the VP of product, of course, wanted more features. And they would not talk to each other to figure out the trade offs between those two.
Yeah.
So that was a case of they certainly, from their perspective, they saw me, not only do I have to compete with the engineering manager, I got to compete with this agile coach guy who wants me to do things differently,
Yep.
right? I was supposed to drive the wedge. They were not making space for it. Um,
That's a great example because it reminds me that there was a time when we were doing this product summit, and talking to certain, senior management, those of the different departments, quality, engineering, et cetera, about what do they want out of this next planning cycle. And it was so bad that they were second guessing each other. Like, well, I'm sure you'll want X. And like, no, I don't want that. Like, they didn't even know what the other person wanted in terms of, yeah, but I disagree, we're not limit. They literally didn't know what the other people even wanted and were guessing wrong. So I thought, and yet all those groups are involved, supposedly on paper, in getting the product out the door from concept to cash.
Yeah.
And literally have no idea what the other groups are even trying to do, much less collaborate. And I think Agile could give so much. You're describing some structures with SAFe that are supposed to do that. So there's something even underneath of saying, how do we work in alignment towards that and bring those people into the room and have those conversations that I do think the Agile coach absolutely can bring about if the organization is willing, has clarity and alignment from on high, et cetera, right, sets the stage. Those are
Right.
great examples. I mean, great examples and amazing results driven by those two clear key results, which I think that's a powerful example of
Mhm.
OKRs in a good way. And then secondly, we can we can do some good stuff and yet miss the, as one person says, we lost the plot, right? Yes, we're going through a whole PI planning session, and yet two senior leaders don't talk to each other. You could check the box and say good PI planning, and they did. Clearly, they're bringing other people in.
Right.
So there's a difference of activity versus results, or output versus outcomes. I think you've heard you say that as well. Like, yes, we're doing a lot of right actions. Will we get these results? Not if those two people don't come together in some meaningful way. But yes, there's some good activity. There's some good agile activity happening here. Like, clearly, the company's recognizing that, and that is good, right? That is good.
Right.
I guess I
Yeah.
throw.
So,
Go ahead. Add to that.
well, so I just to try and do a little more storytelling here. Um, in a book I read, there was the author. Uh, I don't know if this story is apocryphal or what. They didn't make any citations. Um, Although I do know the people involved were involved. So in 1979, Ford Motor Company, those of us who are old enough to remember, Ford Motor Company had a terrible reputation for quality,
Yep.
and they changed that around by, if you remember, for several years they kept all their advertising was saying, "At Ford, quality is job one."
Yep.
That that initiative for quality involved Deming, W. Edwards Deming. He was brought into the company, and the story is that the chairman of Ford introduced him to this 400 whatever senior managers and said, "Follow what Deming says. We need quality. We need to figure out what our quality is whatever." And the story is that the CEO then left because he had things to go do. And he gets to his office and he turns around and there's Deming walking into his office. He's like, "Well, I told those guys you were going to talk to him." He says, "No, where you are, I am," is what Deming said.
Wow.
In other words, if the leaders are not visibly participating in the change won't stick, or it's gonna be much harder for it to stick and be beneficial. Um, so,
Wow.
what I'm trying to say is the best transformations, or the most successful, or at least beneficial transformations that I've seen, are when you start at the management level, upper and middle management, where you're involving them and saying, "Here, I'm here to do things. What do you want to get out of this?" And we're going to track that together as we move along. So often we go into organizations, a coach goes into an organization or any change, and the mandate is go fix the teams, go change the teams. That's not going to be enough. You need to have the managers there because they drive the change and they have the authority, but also we want the managers to be a part of all of that. And they're the key people that have a broad overview of what needs to happen in the organization.
Yep.
And they have powerful things to contribute. And I think it's a mistake if we as change agents leave them out or think that they don't need to be part of it. They need to be part of it because they can benefit too.
Absolutely, 100%. So you make me think of more things. So I think we might have to queue up
Yeah,
an interview part two. Um,
we might have to do that.
I think, which I love. So I love the analogy. I love the image around driving the wedge. The stories are great. So we'll set up for those who are interested. How can people get a hold of you if they want to hear more from you, connect with you, et cetera? What's an easy way that they can get a hold of you?
Well, I'm Daily Agile, all one word, Dayley on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn, of course.
Yes.
Look for Alan Dayley, Agile Coach, uh, kind of stuff. There's another very famous Alan Dayley out there who I don't know if he works for Gartner or not anymore, but he's some kind of analyst, and we sometimes cross. So Alan Dayley, Dayley, with Agile, and just search on Agile after that, and you'll probably hit me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Yeah, everyone take a look at that. As well as if you were any of our Kyle alumni, you might see Alan in our Kyle alumni sessions and get a chance to actually interact one on one.
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot of fun with our last one. So I think everyone got a lot. You were referenced a couple of times, so that's really really good. Well, thank you for taking the time, Alan. Hope to see you in the future. For those who are interested in what Alan's saying, let us know other things you'd like to continue that conversation or other topics. Glad to bring him back and talk more about the topics that everyone's bringing up or questions that you might have for Alan. Shoot them our way and we'll bring them back in. Thanks everyone for listening and have a great
Great, Scott.
day.
Yeah.